It was almost 10 p.m. when I finally pulled into our driveway, headlights sweeping across the front of the house like a silent accusation. I was running late again. Work had stretched longer than it should have, but when you're the guy who keeps the gears turning, you start to accept that late is part of the job. I was tired. I wasn't expecting anything strange. But then I saw it. A car I didn't recognize parked way too close to our front steps, engine still on, headlights beaming straight ahead like they were trying to erase the scene they illuminated. Inside, I saw her, Amber. My wife. And next to her, a man. They were sitting too close. Hands entwined. His thumb tracing slow circles on her palm. That tiny, thoughtless in asterisk Macy that didn't come from nowhere. I froze. For a second, I couldn't move. Just stared from the safety of my driver's seat like if I waited long enough, it would all shift back into something normal. Something harmless. But it didn't. The longer I watched, the more sure I became that this wasn't some innocent carpool drop-off. When I finally got out and walked toward them, Amber saw me and practically flew out of the passenger door like she was trying to intercept a missile. Jeremy, she said, brushing her hair behind her ear, voice clipped and bright, too bright. You're home late? I gestured toward the car. Who's that? Oh, just a colleague. Paul. He gave me a ride back from a meeting. You know how bad parking is downtown. She laughed light, dismissive. We were just talking about this presentation I'm doing next week. Work stuff. Paul didn't even look at me. Just reversed slowly and drove off like he'd practiced this before. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't have the words. But Amber, she filled the space for me. You're not seriously upset about that, are you? She asked, cocking her head. I mean, what are you implying right now? That I can't have a conversation with a male coworker without you getting jealous? There it was. The shift. The gentle accusation turned inside out and placed squarely in my hands. I muttered something about it being fine, shook my head, and walked inside. But it wasn't fine. Not even close. Inside, something in me froze. Not just because of what I saw, but because of how smoothly she'd explained it away, how effortlessly she turned the lens back on me like I was the problem. And the worst part? She seemed practiced. Rehearsed. Like this wasn't the first time she'd had to pivot like that. And maybe, just maybe, I'd been missing something for a long time. The night with Paul didn't explode into a fight like you'd expect. No yelling. No confrontation. Just quiet disorientation. Like realizing your house had shifted a few inches overnight and nothing sat quite where it used to. I went to bed beside her and we said the usual goodnights. But something inside me had already started rewiring. After that night, I couldn't unsee it. Everything I'd brushed off before started coming back in pieces. Not like memories. More like warnings I had ignored. Muted phone calls she'd step into the hallway to take. Just work, she'd say, smiling a little too tightly. Her laptop, which used to live on the kitchen table, now never left the bedroom. Notifications stopped popping up on her phone after 9 p.m. and when I'd asked to use it for something quick, a map, a call, she suddenly had to use the bathroom or it was about to die. I tried not to jump to conclusions. Tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I told myself I was overthinking. That's what she would say if I brought it up. You're reading too much into this, You've been stressed. You're not yourself lately. That became her shield. And I started carrying her defense like it was my own. But denial has a shelf life. One night, maybe a week after the Paul incident, she came home late again. Client dinner, she said. She still wore her heels and that slim-cut blazer she usually reserved for conferences. Her cheeks were a little too flushed, her smile a little too fixed. I asked how it went. Fine, she said, walking past me to the fridge. Tiring. Then she poured herself a glass of wine, even though she'd already said she had drinks with the team. It was like that almost every week. Something always just a little off. So I started writing things down. Not obsessively at first, just casually. I created a note on my phone called Amber's Calendar, but it wasn't the kind she would ever see. I logged when she left, what she said she was doing, when she came home, and how she acted. Then I started noticing patterns. Every other Thursday, she came home a little later. Every other Monday, she wore perfume she used to save for our date nights. It wasn't just the behaviors. It was the pauses in her stories. The vague responses. I'd ask how the client dinner went and she'd say it was good and then immediately change the subject. Not once did she mention who she went with. Not a name, not even a company. Just client. I didn't want to be the guy, the one who checks call logs or snoops on his wife's messages. But there was a night I cracked. She had left her laptop open on the dining table while she was upstairs showering. I glanced at it. Just glanced. But then I saw something. A name. Ethan. It was buried in a Zoom calendar invite, one she hadn't mentioned. It was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Friday, which she had told me was just a team wrap-up. But the invite only had one other person listed. Just Ethan. And the subject line? Recap and discussion. Coast strategy. I googled Ethan and the company name from her firm's site. He wasn't even on her project team. He was from a completely different department. The laptop locked before I could dig further. That night, I asked her how the meeting went. She blinked just once, then said, "Oh, it was canceled." My stomach flipped. She didn't even flinch when she said it. She had the lie ready, fully loaded. I didn't press her. I nodded, smiled, said, "That's too bad." But the second she turned around, I made another entry in the note. Friday, 7 p.m., Zoom with Ethan, lied, said it was canceled. Not mentioned again. By now, that digital journal had grown into something bigger. It wasn't just notes anymore, it was a timeline. A map of every red flag I had ignored, every half-truth I'd accepted, every conversation where she blinked too slowly or smiled too quickly. Sometimes I'd reread it at night, sitting in the living room while she was upstairs in bed. I'd scroll back through those entries and see it all laid out like puzzle pieces, the dates, the moods, the way she looked at her phone and tilted it away from me with just the right amount of subtlety. I'd forgotten what her laugh sounded like when it wasn't careful. There were moments I wanted to confront her. I'd rehearse it in my head over and over. I'd imagine myself asking straight out, "Are you seeing someone?" But I never said it. Not because I didn't want the truth. Because I wasn't sure which version of her I was even talking to anymore. One night, she asked if I wanted to go to a coworker's holiday party. She looked surprised when I said yes. Like she hadn't expected me to show interest in something that had always been her world. I told her I wanted to see her in that environment, meet the people she talked about so much. She gave me that same smile. Too tight. Too quick. Then she said, "Actually, they just made it invite only this year. It's kind of a small thing, mostly for leadership." Leadership. She wasn't in leadership. Another lie. I logged it. I didn't need full-blown proof anymore. The accumulation had already become its own verdict. I wasn't waiting for a dramatic confession. I was watching a slow, polite erosion. One where the house still looked fine from the outside, but the foundation was already hollowed out. That's what betrayal really feels like. Not one moment. A million tiny ones, slowly unraveling what used to feel permanent. I started pulling away in little ways. Not out of spite, just survival. I stopped asking questions I didn't want to hear answers to. I stopped trying to fix conversations that were already broken. When we went to dinner with friends, I let her speak for us. I noticed how often she talked about herself, her job, her stories. I barely existed in her version of our life. And people didn't notice. Or maybe they did. Maybe they were just too polite to say anything. I started sleeping worse. Dreaming more. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and stare at the ceiling, wondering what part of her was real and what part had already left. She still said, "I love you" sometimes. Still kissed me on the cheek when she left for work. But it felt like choreography. Like a performance she didn't want to cancel too early just in case she needed one more scene. I started wondering who knew. Were her coworkers in on it? Did someone at the office cover for her? Was Paul, ride-giving, conveniently timed Paul, the start of it? Or had he just been a decoy? Sometimes I'd imagine what her version of the story was. Was she painting me as distant? Distracted? Did she tell someone over lunch that I worked too much or didn't understand her ambition? Was I the absentee husband in her narrative? It made me sick. One Sunday, she left early for a strategy brunch. I watched her drive away and something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overthinking. I wasn't making it up. There was a second story unfolding under the one we lived every day. And I had been written out of it. I almost didn't go to the tech mixer. It was one of those industry events you RSVP to because your boss expects it, not because you actually want to stand in a too-warm room full of people trying to out-network each other over cocktails. I had every intention of skipping it. I even typed out the "Hey, sorry I couldn't make it" email in my drafts folder. But then I thought, why not? Amber had left that morning without a word, just a note on the fridge about a strategy offsite she'd be at until late. No goodbye, no kiss. Just another Thursday she was out of reach. And maybe, deep down, I wasn't going for the event. Maybe I was going because I couldn't stand another night alone in a house that echoed with everything she wouldn't say. The mixer was at a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, modern, polished, impersonal. I wandered the edges of the room, nursing a drink and letting the conversation wash over me. I wasn't really listening. I was somewhere else entirely. Then I saw her. Amber. She was standing near the bar, her back to me, wearing the same navy dress she'd worn to our anniversary dinner 2 years ago. I hadn't seen it since. It used to be her special occasion dress. Something about that made my stomach twist. She wasn't alone. The man next to her, same height, same posture, was unmistakably the guy from that night in the driveway. Paul. Except now they weren't pretending. They were close. Too close. Laughing at something only they seemed to find funny. She leaned into him, brushing a piece of hair from his forehead. Her hand lingered on his chest. When he reached for her waist, she didn't pull away. They kissed. Right there, in front of everyone. Not a drunken accident. Not a slip. A deliberate, quiet, familiar kiss. Like they'd done it 100 times before. I didn't react. I didn't storm over or shout or cause a scene. I just stood there, tucked behind a concrete pillar with my drink going warm in my hand, heart slowing to a crawl. This was it. The confirmation. The answer to every suspicion I'd logged, every night I'd spent replaying her words like audio tapes gone scratchy with overuse. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did and didn't care. She said she was at an offsite. She had written it down like a calendar appointment, strategy session, 5 p.m. to late. And here she was, drinking mezcal with Paul, lips pressed to his, the glow of the room catching the diamond I gave her like it was mocking me. I left before they could finish. The cold night air outside felt like a slap. I stood on the curb, blinking, trying to ground myself in the sound of traffic, the buzz of distant voices. I felt nothing. Not rage. Not sadness. Just the kind of numb clarity you only get when your body finally stops lying to protect you. It had been real. All of it. Every moment of doubt. Every lie. Every time she told me I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust her, that I was imagining things. They weren't lies to protect me. They were lies to protect the story she was trying to keep intact just long enough to exit it gracefully. I didn't go home right away. I walked aimlessly for a while, through streets I'd driven 1,000 times but never seen on foot. Everything looked different. Older. Like the paint had peeled back and revealed something truer underneath. I sat on a bench outside a closed bookstore and just breathed. I didn't call anyone. Who would I call? What would I say? Hey, turns out my wife is cheating and I've been a fool for months. Want to grab coffee? Eventually, I drove home. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Of course it wasn't. Inside, I left the lights off and just stood in the kitchen, staring at the spot where we used to write grocery lists. I still had one from 3 weeks ago. She had added sparkling water and drawn a heart next to it. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Or both. Instead, I opened the journal app I'd been keeping. I scrolled all the way back to the beginning. To that first entry. The night she stepped out of Paul's car and told me I was imagining things. I read each note, each timestamp, each behavior I'd flagged. It was all there. All of it. I wasn't crazy. I was methodical. Patient. Quiet. I hadn't accused her. I hadn't jumped to conclusions. I had waited for the truth to reveal itself. And it had. Not with a confession. With a kiss. At a mixer I almost skipped. There was something twisted about that. Poetic even. I hadn't caught her in the act in her home or her texts or a misplaced receipt. I'd caught her in the open. In a room full of strangers who didn't know they were watching a marriage collapse between sips of craft cocktails. I didn't tell her I saw. When she got home late that night, past midnight, I was already in bed, eyes closed, heart still. She slipped into the bathroom quietly. No shower. No perfume. Just silence and the sound of her toothbrush hitting porcelain. She climbed into bed and whispered, "You still awake?" I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. Not yet. She sighed and rolled over, her back to me. Just like she always did. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, wondering what it would feel like to love someone again. Not her. Someone else. Someone who didn't smile while lying. Someone who didn't kiss another man in a room I could have walked into. And then I wondered what it would feel like to stop loving her. I thought that would take longer. A week after the mixer, Amber invited me to a gallery opening. That's what she called it, an opening. Like it was casual. Like she hadn't been living two parallel lives. One with me and one with Paul. Weaving between them like a woman performing a high-wire act. I stared at the invitation card she'd left on the counter, half wondering if she'd forgotten I knew. She acted like nothing had happened. In the days after I saw her with him, she was normal. Too normal. She made dinner twice. Asked if I wanted to go hiking next weekend. Even laughed at a dumb joke I made about the dog from the insurance commercial. I realized then that she wasn't trying to rebuild anything. She was curating an exit. Still, I said yes to the gallery. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted to see what the next move was. Maybe I just didn't want her to know I'd already pulled away. The venue was a polished, modern space in a neighborhood that had gentrified faster than I'd realized. Amber wore a pale cream dress, her hair swept up, heels clicking confidently on the gallery floor as she greeted friends, colleagues, strangers. She looked like she belonged there, not beside me but in that crowd. I watched her float from group to group like she wasn't carrying the weight of deception. She smiled easily, too easily. People complimented her. "You two are such a strong couple," one woman whispered to me while sipping white wine. I didn't respond. I just nodded, eyes fixed on Amber as she made her way toward the mic stand. When she tapped it and cleared her throat, I expected her to talk about art, or the featured artist, or even the company she worked for who had apparently sponsored the event. Instead, she said something that made my stomach turn. "Before we get to the next piece," she said, smiling at the crowd, "I just want to take a moment to thank someone who's been by my side for years. My partner, Jeremy." I felt every head turn toward me, smiles stretching across faces that didn't know the truth. Amber continued, "We've decided mutually to take some space from each other. A break. Nothing dramatic." She laughed, and the crowd joined her. Just two people recognizing that growth sometimes means stepping back. We're still friends, still rooting for each other, just figuring things out. Polite applause followed. A toast even. People lifted their glasses. A few patted me on the shoulder, murmuring things like, "So mature of you both," and "That's real love, you know? Letting go with grace." Letting go with grace. I stood there, my face a mask I barely held together. Amber looked over at me and raised her glass. I raised mine too, because what else could I do? Strip the moment bare and yell across the gallery, "I never agreed to any of this"? The truth was, I hadn't been consulted, not asked, not even warned. She framed the end of our marriage like it was an award we jointly accepted for best progressive couple in a supporting role. She didn't mention Paul. She didn't mention betrayal. She didn't mention how she'd built this narrative without me. I didn't know which part stung more, the lie or the applause. After the speech, people came up to talk to her. Some offered sympathy. Others called her brave. I stood near the window, half listening to conversations I wasn't part of. Nobody asked me how I felt. Nobody wanted the real story. Amber worked the room like a politician. When she finally approached me, she had that same bright, composed smile she'd worn all night. "You handled that well," she said, sipping her drink. I blinked at her. "Handled what?" "The announcement," she said, like we were talking about a joint statement drafted by PR. "There was no announcement," I said, voice low. "You made a speech." I raised a glass. "That's not the same thing." She tilted her head, eyes scanning the room instead of me. "Jeremy, I didn't want to blindside you, but it felt like the right time, the right setting." "The right setting?" I echoed. "To rewrite the story?" Her smile faltered for just a second. "I didn't rewrite anything. I just reframed it." "Amber," I said, stepping a little closer, "we haven't had a single conversation about separating. You stood in front of a room full of strangers and announced the end of our marriage like it was an inspirational TED Talk." She took a sip of wine. "I didn't say it was over. You said we're giving each other space. That's a public divorce in soft focus. People understand nuance," she said quietly. "No, they don't," I said. "They understand applause." She looked away. "Do you want to do this here?" I paused, then shook my head. "No, not here. Not anywhere." The drive home was silent. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay there, watching her breathe beside me like nothing had happened. My body didn't know how to react anymore. Fight or flight didn't apply when the battlefield was staged and the enemy wore your wedding ring. The next morning, I found myself deleting photos from my phone. Not angrily, mechanically. Vacation *TS, birthday dinners, candid smiles on rooftops. Each one slid into the void with a swipe of my thumb. It didn't even feel sad. Later that week, friends started texting. "Saw the news," one wrote. "Proud of you both." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to explain that I hadn't known we were in a breakup until she announced it over canapes and ambient jazz. Amber moved through the house like nothing had changed. Still made coffee in the French press. Still left her bag by the front door. Still hung her coats on the same hook. But I noticed she'd stopped wearing her ring. Slipped it off quietly like shedding a skin. She left it on the bathroom counter. No ceremony. Just glass, tile, and gold. I picked it up once. Turned it over in my hand. There was a tiny inscription on the inside. For every version of us. We came up with that line after a night of drinking and talking about how we'd change, grow, evolve over time, but always stay together. I thought it meant resilience. She probably thought it meant options. After the gallery night, something shifted permanently. We still shared the house, but not the life. I started keeping a duffel bag half-packed by the door. Just in case. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Another announcement? A text from Paul sent to the wrong phone? A confession? None came. Instead, Amber became more pleasant. More composed. She smiled easily, made more jokes, talked about herself in the third person when describing her plans. Amber might go to LA next month, she said one morning. I nodded. Sounds great. I no longer asked questions. She no longer offered details. We were coexisting inside the final chapter, both pretending the story still made sense. She got to be the public heroine, graceful and liberated. I got to be the placeholder, the man who didn't fall apart. The man who, according to whispers at the gallery, was handling things beautifully. But I wasn't handling anything. I was just watching it all unfold. And the worst part? She was winning the narrative. It was raining the day he showed up. The kind of rain that just lingers, gray, steady, unbothered by umbrellas or weather forecasts. I was home early for once, standing barefoot in the kitchen, staring at a toaster that had somehow stopped working overnight. The house was quiet, save for the occasional hiss of tires outside on wet pavement. Then came the knock. Not hurried, not hesitant, just firm. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. I wasn't expecting anyone. Amber had left that morning with her usual "I'll be late" routine and a kiss on the cheek that missed. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. There he was. A man maybe 5 or 6 years older than me. Tall. Slender. Clean-shaven in that way people either work hard to maintain or do out of habit. He wore a jacket soaked through at the shoulders and held a manila folder under one arm, slightly warped from the rain. Are you Jeremy? He asked. I hesitated. Yeah. I'm Dan. I didn't know the name, but something about the way he said it made me step back instinctively. Not in fear, just readiness. I developed that muscle lately, the one that flinched at surprises. I was engaged to Amber, he said. The words didn't quite register. I blinked. What? He took a breath. A long time ago. Before you. Before this house, before Paul, before whatever this version of her is. We were together for 4 years. I just stared at him. Rain dripping from his collar. Eyes steady. No trace of anger, just something else. A kind of weary knowing. I don't know what she's told you about me, if anything, he said. But I figured, if she's doing it again, you deserve to know. He held out the folder. I didn't take it at first. Something about it felt radioactive. But I couldn't stop myself. My hand moved before my brain finished arguing. The folder was heavier than I expected. Inside were printouts, photos, emails, financial records, travel confirmations. A map of destruction methodically laid out. She did the same thing to me, Dan said. Met me at a work event, charmed everyone. We got serious quick. She moved in, started talking about starting a business together. Then one day, I found out she'd been using my name to open credit accounts. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. Always just under the radar. Always temporary, she said. I flipped through the documents. Amber smiling in photos with him, younger but not unrecognizable. Her handwriting on a receipt. A hotel reservation. A note in her signature loopy cursive, you make me feel like I matter again. She left me, he said. No fight. No warning. Just a text. I need to rediscover who I am. Please don't contact me. I never saw her again until last month. I didn't know she was married. He motioned toward the folder. I didn't come here to cause problems. But I saw the signs. When I found out your name and looked you up, saw the house, the job, the timing. I realized she hadn't changed. She'd just rebooted. New name, new partner, same playbook. I invited him in. We sat at the kitchen table while the rain painted gray lines across the windows. I made coffee without asking. We didn't talk much while it brewed. I just kept flipping pages. Receipts dated 8, 9 years ago. Amber's old phone number written in the margin of a lease. Her signature on a wire transfer from Dan's account to hers. She took $7,000 from me, he said. Said it was to cover a freelance gig that hadn't paid out yet. Never saw it again. Did you report her? He laughed. Not bitterly, just with a kind of emptiness. I did. But she'd used just enough plausible deniability. Lawyers called it personal loans with implied consent. I didn't have it in writing. And the police? They shrugged. Said it was a domestic matter. I shook my head, feeling something colder than rage. She's smart, Dan said. Always was. Knows how to make people feel like she's saving them. But she's not. She's just moving through. I looked at the last photo in the stack. Amber on a beach, sunglasses on, sitting beside Dan with her legs tangled in his. I'd seen that same pose in a photo she and I had taken in Miami. Different backdrop. Same choreography. I thought I was her one, I said, voice quieter than I expected. Dan looked down into his coffee. So did I. We sat there for another 20 minutes, mostly silent. The rain never let up. When he stood to leave, he left the folder on the table. I don't know what you'll do with it, he said. But you deserve to know who you're dealing with. I nodded. He hesitated at the door. She's good at pretending it was all a phase, he added. Like we were the mistake, not her. Don't let her do that to you. Then he left. The moment the door closed, the house felt different. Like something had cracked, not loudly but deep. I sat down again, stared at the folder, and suddenly the timeline I'd built in my journal didn't feel like mine anymore. It was a sequel. Different setting. Same story. I pulled out a notebook and copied a few key dates from the documents. When I cross-referenced them with my own timeline, the overlaps were sickening. There were patterns. Phone behavior. Spending. Deflection. All replaying in almost the same sequence. It was like reading a script with new actors. Only I wasn't the lead. I was just the next placeholder. That night, Amber came home humming something. She had a bag of takeout and a bottle of wine. She kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't erased someone else's name and penciled mine in like a revision note. What's all this? I asked. She smiled. I just wanted to have a night together. No distractions. No distractions. I watched her pour the wine. Watched the way she glanced at her phone before setting it face down. I didn't mention Dan. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to give her the stage until I was sure I had taken back the script. Instead, I smiled. Took the glass. Let her talk. And I wondered how many other men had sat across from her like this, thinking they were part of a love story when they were really just a chapter she hadn't finished copying yet. A few days after Dan's visit, I was cleaning out the hall closet when I found a box labeled Wedding Keepsakes. Inside, tucked behind our guest book and dry bouquet, was a draft of Amber's vows. The first thing I noticed? Dan's name. Lightly crossed out just once. My name, Jeremy, was written above it in different ink. Underneath, the line, "You're my first real home." I froze. That line was identical to the one she'd whispered to me during our honeymoon. I remember thinking it was spontaneous, pure. Turns out it was recycled. Like a monologue she'd tested before. I wasn't her beginning. I was the rewrite after a failed opening act. 3 days later, I left. No fight. No confrontation. I packed a single bag, locked the door, and drove until the city disappeared. I found a quiet room above a bookstore near the coast. Cash only. No social media, no emails, no voicemail. Amber started pinging our friends. Calling my brother. Searching. I didn't respond. She still doesn't know where I am. Not truly. After the gallery speech, after rewriting our ending without me, I gave her what she claimed we both needed, space. The real kind. The kind that doesn't return calls. The kind that doesn't say goodbye. And in that silence I finally heard myself again. Not healed. Not whole. But no longer hers.